Welcome to Take the Lead Radio with Dr. Diane Hamilton, where she interviews some of the most successful leaders, entrepreneurs, authors, speakers, and other individuals who will inspire you to take the lead in your career and personal life. And now, here is Dr. Diane Hamilton.
I am here with Dave Ulrich, who's ranked as the #1 management guru by Business Week, profiled by Fast Company as one of the world's top 10 creative people in business, a top 5 coach in Forbes, and recognized on Thinkers 50 as one of the world's leading business thinkers. His best-selling books and popular speeches shape the corporate agenda. He's written 30 books and more than 200 articles. And he is known as the father of modern HR and HR thought leader of the decade. So it's so nice to have you here, Dave.
Boy, Diane, when you read that, I just get exhausted. I'm already
exhausting,
tired.
Wasn't it? I know. I am fascinated by your work. I mean, we had a chance to talk a little before the show, and I'll tell you, I've done a little bit of research. I know you are a professor at University of Michigan, that you have an interesting background. You were an English major, but you moved from law to organizational behavior, and you have a PhD in statistics and taxonomy. Am I right on any of that?
Now you've made me not only tired, but aged. Yeah,
I could join that club.
All true.
Well, that's very interesting background. I mean, I think that it fascinates me. The PhD in statistics and taxonomy hurts my brain just thinking about that. But let's start with you wanted to be an English major and you were interested in law, and you had to tell your parents you wanted to go into organizational behaviors, which is quite a difference. So what led to your interest in just going into HR to begin with?
You know, I don't think I grew up and said, "Oh, when I grow up, I want to be in HR." That wasn't my desire. I, for some reason, thought I'd go into law, and I thought to get into law, you study English. So I studied English. I'll try to keep this so it doesn't bore people to death. But so I was taking English, and I mean, having fun and taking English, and I thought, oh, I need another course. And a colleague said, take this course in OB, organizational behavior. I'd never heard much about that. I did, and the professor just captivated me. He said, I have no assignments. Look at the organizations where you work, live, and play, and figure out how they work and how do they shape the lives of the people. And it just captivated me. And so being hypergraphic, and nobody will know what that means. I learned that word about 3 years ago. I'm almost addicted to writing. I started writing, and I ended up writing 10 to 12 page papers for the professor, one a week.
Wow.
Now I cheated. The issues of power in Paradise Lost, Beowulf, the ideal organization man, and so I take my papers and cheat and turn them into my English professors in Shakespeare and my organizational behavior professor. And my English professor said, this is just weird stuff, and he said, this is great. And then he said, why are you going into law? Why would anybody do that to themselves? Take another course. And I did, and I'll be real quick. He said, start to study organizations. And I said, okay, I'm going to study the English department. So I decided I'd do an assessment of the English department, and surveyed alumni, surveyed faculty, compared them to other English departments, and my report was not very positive. And the faculty, after I presented it to the English department faculty, said, we met after your report and decided it was a great report and you should not graduate in English. So they threw me out of the department as a young college student. I went to my OB professor and said, you caused this. And he laughed and he said, oh, this is the greatest thing ever. You've learned about organizations. This is so good. And anyway, net, he got me to start studying more, and I still have great allegiance to him as one of my many mentors. So that got me into the field, and the rest, I guess, would be history. I called my parents and said, Mom and Dad, I'm not going to go into law school. I'm going to go into OB. And they said, oh, this is okay. You're going to be a doctor. And I said, no, it's organizational behavior. And they said, what's that? And I said, I have no clue, but it captures me. And I assume, Diane, you've interviewed so many people, you can see that little nugget of light that just gets captured and sparked.
Right.
And that's what sparked me.
Well,
and
that's a great story. And, I was thinking when you said about Beowulf, it comes to mind, well, everyone in my family they all went into English degrees, and I think of Woody Allen talking about how painful it was to get through Beowulf. Do you miss any of that? I mean, now do you still do a lot of reading in the?
Oh, I do a lot of reading, but I don't. English is one of the great preparatory degrees because it teaches you to think and to write, and have never regretted any of that. Being in organizational behavior is a blessing because you think about organizations and it's a curse. My friend of 40 years, we just traveled together. At the end of our trip, 11 days together last week, he said, "Dave, you've never changed in 40 years." Otherwise, I said, "You cannot let an organization go by without changing it." He said, "We fly through this airport, and the airport is not organized very well. You spend 10 minutes lamenting about how you would restructure the flow of traffic, the service." I am just a horrible dinner date because I'll call the maitre d' over and I'll call the owner over and we'll rearrange the structure. But that's the passion for organizations that I just haven't lost. It's still there.
That's great. Do you also correct their grammar? I mean, do you get upset if they say "between you and I"? They're talking to you.
I probably don't. What was your undergraduate, Diane? What was your undergraduate in?
All of my degrees are in business management.
In business. So see, I don't correct you or and I don't know what. Well, obviously, you've been sparked with ideas. I mean, you're writing history and you're teaching history and you're interviewing history. And I sometimes it's just kind of fun to have something that sparks you.
Right.
And for me, it's organizations. I just enjoy observing, thinking about, and trying to figure out how to make an organization work better.
Well, I saw you said that you're passionate about how to add value, how HR can add value, and I work in a couple of organizations where it just seems like everybody uses the word value proposition. What does that mean to you? I mean, are we overusing that? How do we add value? Why is that your hot button?
It's really a simple premise, and again, value has so many different definitions. It's like strategery. Let's go into that. But for me, value is very simple. It's the outcome that the receiver gets. Value is defined by the receiver, not the giver. I've been in a relationship with my wife for over 40 years, and when I get her a gift, she defines the value of the gift. I don't. And in any transaction, it's not what I give that matters. It's what the other person gets. So it changes our assumptions. In the business world, they say, build on your strengths. And my comment is that's insufficient. You have to build on your strengths so that they'll strengthen others. Leadership authenticity. Well, that's not enough. If you're authentic but not creating value for somebody else, that's not good leadership. That what I'm intrigued with is not the activity, but how the activity creates value for a receiver. And that receiver could be an employee in a company. It could be the company itself. It could be a customer. It could be an investor. But kind of behind most of my work is it's not what I do. It's how people get value because of what I do. And so when I coach leaders, I often say, when I coach leaders, tell me who you are creating value for. And they often don't have a clear answer because they're so impressed with, I want to be trustworthy, I want to be authentic. And I'm going, well, that's really good, but that's not leadership. That's self-interest. That's in some ways narcissism. What matters about leadership is that you're making somebody else better. You're building on strengths that strengthen others, and that's the agenda that I think I've been pretty passionate about.
Well, I think we met through Professor Rao introduced us. He's a soft leadership expert, and you don't really hear soft leadership here. You hear soft skills, you hear leadership, you hear management. What do you think about how we're teaching soft skills? And is HR the one that should be doing this? Is it universities, families? How come we're having such issues with people being fired for their behaviors?
A great question. And what's interesting in business schools, and I'm not an expert in business school education, but I've been around it for a long time. I think business schools started with an agenda around the technical parts of business: economics, finance, marketing, statistics, heaven forbid, information technology. I think what we find now is smart students can get that almost anywhere. You can get that through exceptional business courses, through exceptional online courses. What what really differentiates a future business leader is not the hard skills. You got to have those. I mean, if you can't read an income statement or balance sheet, but you can learn that. It's the subjective soft stuff, and it's those soft skills that are actually really hard to teach and hard to acquire. And so defining what they are, how you build them, how you develop them becomes a critical force of business school education as well as leadership. And so, well, let me stop there. I could go on forever about that, but I think you're right. I think the soft skills become the hard part of good leadership.
Well, it is. I like the way you put that. They do become the hard part, and I think so many people get fired because of that. And I know that just from my speaking and what I do, a lot of it is around those. They're always asking for things that kind of fall into that area of what they want you to come speak about. So as I told you before, I'm working on this book about curiosity, and you mentioned assumptions, and I found that there were 4 things that really held us back from curiosity, and there were fear, assumptions, technology, and environment were the things that my fun factor analysis, I don't enjoy statistics like you do, but what I found were kind of the 4 areas that were involved in that. And I'm curious if you think that there's what are we doing that we could help people at work become more curious? I think with the focus on artificial intelligence and some of the stuff that are coming out, so many people want to be more innovative. Of course, everybody wants to be productive. Everybody wants to improve in engagement. Do you see much of a tie with improving, in the area of curiosity? And what's your input on that?
Again, another great question. There's so many ways to go with that answer. I really enjoy the work by Carol Dweck, a professor at Stanford. She is definitely a thought leader. Have you met her? I've never met her.
I haven't met her, but I mean, Mindset is such a great book. I love her work. I think it's, you can really get a lot out of that book. If anybody's listening and they haven't read the book, it's on my list.
And she has a website, curious.com. Mm-hmm. My wife has her PhD in positive psychology from University of Michigan. So that's one reason. There's a whole other side of life. That's why I ended up at Michigan, is to follow her as she did her graduate work. And she works in that area of growth mindset. And for me, growth mindset is founded on the premise of curiosity. It's founded on inquiry. It's founded on discovery. And it's saying, when there's a problem, do I come to that problem with curiosity, with learning, with the desire to do something new? Now, I really like that probably because it's something that I feel a personal passion about as well. And I'll go personal and then more business oriented. In my personal work, I do talks, as we all do, and sometimes have PowerPoint presentations. My rule of thumb for the past number of decades has been, do I have 20 to 25% new material every 18 to 24 months? And you go, well, that's not a big deal. And you go, holy smokes. I mean, it's easy when you're starting. You have all new material. Right. But it's very easy to get locked into what works. Mm-hmm. And in fact, in some people in our field, I can tell the time of day by their joke. I mean, they're not presenters, they're performers, and they're doing a Shakespeare play, if you use that metaphor. And they might as well be on video. When I present, I never get as good a ratings because I'm creating 20% new stuff. And for me, that's the essence of growth mindset. That's the essence of curiosity. Am I willing to overcome the 4 things you talked about, the fear of failure? Am I willing to experiment? Am I willing to try? And my sense is that's legitimate in organizations at 2 levels. One is at a personal level. Leaders and individuals have to reinvent themselves. Marshall Goldsmith's great book, What Got You Here Won't Get You There, is so insightful because he says the things that made you successful are not the things that are going to make you successful in the future. And second, I think that applies at an organizational level. The tendency is for most organizations to die because they don't reinvent, they don't recreate, they don't come up with new stuff. And the challenge is, how do you create individual settings for individuals and organizations to continue to have that spark of curiosity that leads to the growth mindset and that leads to a growth organization? So I I think that area of inquiry is fascinating.
Well, I think so. I'm really interested in it. Carol Dweck's work, was part of course, what I researched, and a lot of what she focused on. A lot of the things were environmental. Of when you're, I'm trying to think of the examples she gave, but if if you told somebody, oh, you're a natural at this, that you're not really helping them, because then they think they don't have to try so much because it comes naturally, right?
I don't know, and we haven't gotten that personal around kids, but we've had 3 kids, and we used to say, "Oh, I'm so proud of you. You got an A or you got a B." Well, that's the wrong response. I mean, it's such a natural parenting response. I'm proud of you because of the grade.
Right.
No, I'm proud of you because of the work that you put in to get the grade, and the focus is not on the outcome; it's on the process. And then because the downside is, and for me, this is one of the powerful things of this growth mindset is, if you focus on the outcome, oh, I'm proud of you because you got these high marks. That's wonderful. Well, what happens when you take chemistry and you get a bad mark? I'm no longer proud of you? No, I'm still proud of you. And my wife teaches this stuff a lot, and she says it's always fascinating to ask people, and I won't ask you this on the air because it would be very inappropriate, but think of something that hasn't gone well in your life. And we all have got those. I mean, I can raise both hands, both feet. There are always things that haven't gone well. What did you learn? And again, I'm doing this rhetorically.
I understand.
What did you learn, and how did that change what's happened since? And when I do the exercise, not very well, I'm not a psychologist, or Wendy, my wife, does it, it's just fascinating for people to suddenly begin to go, that experience, it didn't go well. It could have been at work. It could have been in a relationship. It could have been in any number of settings. That really became a foundation for growth and learning. And I think that's the growth mindset issue, is that we're not failing, we're learning. I mean, that's the message. And that failing forward, whatever metaphor you want, is. And the curiosity is not about the event. It's about the process that led up to the event. And so I'm not curious about, back to my English class. My professor taught me that without having the same language they have today. He said, so what did you learn? You got kicked out of an English degree a semester before you graduated. And he said, I'm not as interested that you got kicked out. That's fine. You graduated. You'll be fine. But what did you learn? Could you have done different? Could you have presented it differently? Did you have an impact? And I said, no, I just irritated people. And he said, well, the goal of a change agent is to be an irritant, but to be an irritant that leads people to change. So what did you learn? How did you get better? That, it didn't go the way you wanted. And how did you learn from that? And boy, that was really helpful to process. And I've had those things happen. I'm sure you've not had any of those mistakes. I've had those career setbacks over and over again, and they become stepping stones for the future. That's the curiosity. It's not about the event, but it's about the process behind the event.
Well, I think I've seen a big change in how they view failure in organizations. I'm from the boomer generation, and you weren't allowed to fail when I first got into the workplace. It's been, now I think they do see it as a more of a learning experience, and I like seeing that, the change. At least my experience has been that. And I love Marshall Goldsmith was on my show, and I've met so many of his MG100 group. They've all been on, not all, but a lot of them have been on, and they're all just so fascinating because they deal with the stuff that I'm interested in. Is what we're talking about is how we get that people to make the changes, to grow, and to not just keep doing the same thing. And I could feel your pain on the speaking, changing what you have to talk about, because I couldn't give that same talk over and over again, even if it was successful, because I would be bored to death. I mean, after a while, you'd be great at delivery, I guess, but maybe not after a certain point. So I think that now that we're trying to keep up with millennials who want to make a change in the world, and they want more feedback, and there's just such a different kind of a workplace than what I was experiencing what I experienced, I should say, in the 70s and the 80s, and it's just a different time. So I'm very fascinated by what we can do to make us continue to be more innovative, creative, and successful. And with my work, I guess I'd like to get in front of the leaders, the CEOs, to get their influence, their input to get workplace, to get workers more curious about what they do and get them involved. But, I was on actually somebody interviewed me this morning on their show, and she asked me a question that I think is a very challenging question. I'm going to ask you the same question she asked me. I want to hear your advice. Which is, if leaders don't want to change and they have a negative culture, if they're unethical or issues or not growing or whatever it is in the company, how can employees do anything about it?
Well, I should find out how you answered that.
No, that's cheating. You already said you cheated in college. You can't cheat again.
I didn't cheat. I dual processed. I multitasked.
Okay, we multitasked.
And it's funny. I've written a number of books, and you alluded to that. And I'm trying to have ideas that have impact and distribution. So about a year ago, I thought, and we have another book coming out. I'm really excited. In fact, I just got a note that I think we're going to get the publishers locked into this week. But I started posting on LinkedIn every Tuesday. And I'm finding that's really fascinating because you have to write on LinkedIn either a 150-word short post or a 1,200-word article. The article I posted 2 weeks ago was, how do I follow a leader I don't necessarily like?
Right.
And it's an interesting issue that there are times in work and in politics and in life that we have leaders who may have policies or practices that result in good outcomes that we tend to favor, but their personal style just doesn't work. And it's an interesting choice, and it's not, people have responded on this, and I've gotten a lot of comments on it, that they've said, well, just leave them. Well, that's naive. I mean, pretend that they don't exist. Well, that's naive. I mean, that's simplistic. So we'll get them to change. Well, there are times when leaders don't change. So how do I begin to deal with these leaders who, and hopefully it's a leader like you that has charming personal, interpersonal, great skills and great outcomes. But what if they get the outcomes without the skills and they're not able to change? How do you manage that? And I've struggled with that. I mean, I think in a whole host of different settings. What I think we end up saying is, there's a fascinating metaphor that I really like, and again, I'm going to date myself again, but when I was growing up, Christmas tree lights were on and I'll get this backwards, but they were on I think a parallel sequence of electricity. If one light went out, the whole bulb went out. And so you had to change every light. And people in today's world would go, I have no clue what you're talking about. But today what it is, if one light goes dim, the stays good. Mm-hmm. Well, that's one of the issues I think we have to recognize in our lives today. That with leaders and even in interpersonal relationships, not every light's going to be shining all the time. Right. I've been in a marriage over 40 years, and we get along really well, and there are still times when some of the light bulbs aren't shining as bright, and it's okay. It's okay. In philosophy, they talk about thesis, antithesis, and synthesis. The thesis is, I'm in love, everything's wonderful. The antithesis, I can't stand you anymore. The synthesis, I'm in love with you, and some of the bulbs are dim. Now, that didn't come out very well, but I think that's some of the issue with leadership is that how do I follow a leader even though all the behaviors may not be right? Now, there may be a point at which it crosses my values or the behavior that they're exhibiting gets so dysfunctional that it takes away from their ability to accomplish their outcomes, and I can't support that. I mean, anyway, I've just gone down a rabbit hole, and I apologize.
No, that's interesting. I didn't know, when she asked me, it's a very challenging thing to me to ask that question because, if a leader doesn't want to embrace change, it's going to be really almost impossible to do it from the bottom up. So it's something that I always wonder how difficult it would be to work for somebody who had maybe great outcomes, like you said, but personality issues, maybe Steve Jobs, for example. Would that be somebody you'd have difficulty working for or not? Based on what you've read.
Funny. and again, anecdotes are fascinating.
Yeah.
He left Apple. He came back. I was on the road, and my assistant got a call and said, "Dave, somebody called for you named Stephen Jobs. Pretty powerful. Have you heard of him?" And I got on the phone. He said, "I'm coming back into Apple. I know I've got to create new culture because the culture that we started with has had to evolve. Who do you know that might help me with that?" And one of my 10 career faux pas is I should have said me, but I didn't. And so I gave him some leads. But Stephen Jobs, I mean, you begin to say, does the end justify the means? I've worked with some very tough leaders and been on both sides of the equation. I did an enormous amount of work with Jack Welch. I was on the good side, and I ended up on the bad side. And I think there are times and that's why that question of how do I follow a leader when I may not like everything the leader does? And I think it's a very tough question, and it becomes a principle of choice and agency. Can I respect myself? Can I look at myself in the morning in the psychological mirror and say, yeah, we're doing stuff that's making a difference? And boy, I think that's just a very difficult kind of setting. And now I'm going to go back to your theory. Am I curious about it? Am I willing? I think ignorance is not bliss. I mean, hiding it and saying, "Oh, I'm going to pretend these bad behaviors don't exist." Well, that's just a head in the sand. The ostrich's head in the sand doesn't work. But I'm conscious of this trade-off that I'm making. Let me try to come back. In some of the work I've done, and when I went to my PhD program, I remember I come out of an English major. I ended up doing statistics, and taxonomy. Taxonomy is the science of simplicity. It's how do you find order in complexity. And so a lot of what I've done throughout my career is to say the world is complex. What makes a great leader? Well, there are 50,000 things, and you've had these great people on your shows. Well, my job is to say, what's the simple message? And we've said, and we've got pieces on that, but leaders have to be authentic. I got it. What's next? They have to add value to others. I got it. They have to have emotional intelligence, curiosity. I got it. What's next? Well, what we have found next is they have to navigate paradox, that these are cumulative skill sets. If you're not authentic, nobody's going to listen to you. If you don't add value to others, who cares who you are? If you're not curious, you're not learning. Well, paradox is the navigation of tension. I have to be long-term and short-term. I have to care about people and systems. I have to manage top-down and bottom-up. I have to ask questions and give answers. And what we're finding in our research is that leaders who can navigate this inherent paradox tend to be those that are going to be more successful. So does emotional intelligence matter? Absolutely. But it's not all that matters. You've also got to have social intelligence. You've got to have curiosity. Is curiosity enough? No. You've got to take curiosity and turn it into action. And it's at that nexus of paradox where leadership ultimately makes its most powerful impact. And so our latest research on leadership is how do you help leaders navigate paradoxes? And we just laid out one. The leader gets results, but their behaviors may not be the ones I'm comfortable with. You know what? That's a paradox. It's a tension. And good followers have to constantly navigate some of that inherent tension. Can I disagree without being disagreeable? Can I have tension without contention? That's the kind of things that we're finding when I have the privilege of coaching leaders. Do you want to get results? Absolutely. I want to get results. Well, can you navigate the paradoxes that lead to those results? And that's some of the work we've been doing in leadership work.
Well, your work is fascinating, and some of that you're making me think of the reason I was writing what I wrote about curiosity, because I didn't want to just find out, are you curious or not? I wanted to know what's holding you back, and then what do you do about it, right? And I think that some of the work out there, sometimes they identify issues, but then they don't give you a real action plan of what you do next. And you can't, it's tough to be all things. You're reminding me of taking piano when you're saying, can you do this and do that? And I was okay on piano as long as I did just my right hand. I had to add that left hand. Then you're doing both things at the same time. And it starts to get very challenging. And I think that what you're talking about is so important about navigating. I think there's a lot of identifying, but not what to do once you've discovered what issues are. Do you think, or is that just my perception?
I totally agree. I I mean, if I were having the privilege of sitting down with you and saying, boy, Diane, your work on curiosity is so good. Let me give you 2 words to fill in the blank. I want to help people be curious so that.
Right.
So that. Well, what's the outcome? I mean, curiosity is an activity. What's the outcome that I'm more interested in? I'm really sorry. I have a cold and I keep sniffling. So I'm really embarrassed about that. But so that, and then the other side is because of. So the because, if you put curious in the middle of the page, on the left-hand side is because of. Here's what leads to curiosity. On the right-hand side is the outcome. So that, and it's managing that inherent tension because of and so that helps me develop some of that curiosity. And it sounds like you're doing that quite brilliantly. That I want to study curiosity so that people can have better well-being in their life, so that organizations can adapt to the incredibly rapidly changing world in which we live. Now, let me come back to a point, and I was working on this this weekend. We talk about the next generation, and I love these LinkedIn pieces that force me to be really clear. One of my, and I'll tell you the anecdote, and then I'll give you the concept that's consistent. One of my friends, a colleague, teaches in IT technology at a university. And every semester, the student comes in and says, I've got the latest, greatest app that's going to change the world. Help me get my app out there. I'm going to be the next Stephen Jobs. I'm going to be the next Elon Musk. I'm going to change the world. And what would you recommend? And the professor says, take a class in how to code. And the student just goes, oh, you got to be kidding me. That's boring. There is something to be said about learning the basics.
Right.
Back to the business school. You do have to read an income statement. You do have to read a balance sheet. You have to do a marketing plan. I mean, this is paradox. You've got to do some of these basics well. Bill Gates was an exceptional coder before he created Microsoft. Stephen Jobs learned some basic skills that enabled him to do the work he did. To the millennials, I don't think we want to get obsessed with basics. But I think we've also got to say there are some basic skills that are necessary to enable you to be successful at what you want to do. And that's the navigating paradox, is how do we help people be comfortable with those basics and then begin to exercise the curiosity and creativity to create the future.
Well, I'm glad you brought up the millennial issue, because I was listening to your one talk that you were, you mentioned millennials spend 6 to 7 hours a day in front of a screen. And so there's a challenge of how you use tech to build connection and experience among people. And, we have a generation and just a situation where there's so much virtual working out there. There's so many people that are becoming more isolated. And, and I know you've looked at the research out there about what isolation does to people. Can you talk a little bit about that? And
this one just, and again, let me frame this. One of my passions is, how do you create organizations that deliver value to people? How do I help people have better well-being, better lives through the organizations where they live, work, and play? And in the spirit of taxonomy or simplicity, we look for easy answers to that. I think there's 3 things. An organization helps people have a sense of belief, a sense of purpose, a sense of personal identity. Number 2, an organization helps people become better. I learn skills. If I work at Forbes University, or if I work at wherever I work, I can learn skills. And 3rd, it helps me belong. Believe, become, and belong. Taxonomy, really simple. The belonging piece is so critical. And you highlighted some of the research we've seen. There's some studies. What's the leading cause of mortality? Is it obesity? Is it smoking? Is it hypertension? What is it? And the leading cause of mortality is social isolation. That when people become socially isolated, it has horrible outcomes. I mean, depression, discouragement, and mortality. Now, one of my academic friends said, what's the cause and what's the effect? And I said, think about that for just a minute. That's a religious question. If you die, are you more socially isolated after you die? And I said, well, that's a religious question.
Right.
But I think, Diane, that's such a key issue, is In the technology world, we've often used technology to isolate us. I walk through airports. What percent of people have headphones on? You've taught universities. What percent of students have headphones on a college campus? You've done a lot of work with online learning. I love the idea of online learning. The dilemma is, how do you do that in a way that connects people,
right,
that doesn't isolate people? So blended learning. And that social isolation, again, believe, purpose, become, improve, that's growth mindset, and then belong. Organizations should become tribes or communities where we have this sense of belonging, and technology should be a vehicle to enhance that, not isolate it. So that's what we're starting to see in organizations. How do you use technology to help people create community?
Well, I'm glad, I was just going to ask you more about that, about working virtually and its impact on isolation and e-learning and different aspects of it. And it makes me think, you mentioned the Forbes School of Business. We have a great professor, Dr. Katie Theory, runs the master's and the bachelor's of HR. And part of what she's done to try and, get the virtual learning students into a blended learning situation is create programs through LinkedIn and different ways for people to communicate and be a part of a tribe and be, have a value proposition and all the things that we talked about earlier. And I think it's very challenging in e-learning because it is a different way of learning. And, I've received degrees in different formats. I have in traditional, I've gone to, online universities, I've done different things. And for me, I really love e-learning. And some people say they could never do it. They would never be motivated. They would never, it would never interest them at all. But for me, I'm much more efficient that way. I learn really well. I think that it was kind of fascinating to me to see MOOCs kind of come out to give people more access to education. But it's, of course, those are an e-learning kind of situation. And I'm curious what you think of MOOCs, and have they taken off as much as you thought? And what do you think the future is of the massive open online courses like the ones we see at Harvard and some of the other universities that have opened up education to the world?
Again, this is a paradox. Here's the good news. It's opened up education to the world, and there are people like you for whom that is a remarkable growth mindset, curiosity, and it works. Overall, I think what they're finding in MOOCs is they're not working. That the graduation rates are lower.
Right.
That you can learn how to do math, 2 + 2 = 4, but those soft skills, empathy, understanding, relationship, curiosity, it's hard to do that in a MOOC. Those are soft skills that require some form of interpersonal connection. Now, where I think that's headed, I said before, thesis, antithesis, synthesis. Thesis, all learning should be online. Well, that's stupid. All learning should be classroom. That's equally stupid. Synthesis, how do we do, and I use the word blended learning, how do we do some of the learning, e-learning, self-paced online, which I also tend to love, but that's probably my self-motivation as yours. How do we then also create community? So at the business school at the University of Michigan, they've started an online course, but you come together frequently in small teams, in communities, and you begin to create these tribes or these small communities, project groups, where you learn to build those relationships. You have empathy. You begin to learn to manage conflict. And again, this is the paradox. You try to navigate these different approaches to learning so that the better learning begins to occur. I think it's dangerous to say MOOCs are all successful or they're all failures. I think we're getting more subtle in saying there's times and places to do some of both of those.
Well, it's interesting. You brought up something that I've talked to a lot of people about in the past in terms of the future of education. And a lot of people say, millennials like to get pieces of information in smaller bites. They don't want to, maybe they won't like to get complete degrees in the future that won't be as valued as it has been in the past. And what would happen if we had more of an a la carte? I'll pick this, I'll pick that. This is what I want to learn. If I was Steve Jobs, I might take calligraphy instead of taking this. And then you get all these things. And what I think is really important, because you talk about the importance of soft skills, and to me, the humanities and soft skills, and some of the stuff that you may not pick if you pick a la carte. What you're learning is all this stuff is kind of the glue, I think, that holds the entire, what you've learned together. You get the package together. And so I kind of worry about what will happen in the future. And
so when you do the online learning, how do you bring the soft skills and the relationship and connection pieces to your courses? Well, what do you do to help make that happen?
Critical thinking is something that they try to put into every single course. So there's certain skills that just come automatically. A lot of it, you have to deal with tone. There's netiquette. There's so many different, online etiquette, they call netiquette. I don't know if that's a common term or not, but we have certain things that I've taught, everything from first day courses that the bachelor's, are taking when they're going into college, to doctoral students getting their, doing their dissertation. So I teach all different types of levels, but those first courses that you teach, I think, are the most critical, because you're teaching people what's appropriate behavior in online education, which is, you're going to help people with a lot of those soft skills in terms of, you don't type in all caps, which means you're yelling, and even though it's in the technology realm, you're getting through to them what's okay and what's not okay in terms of behaviors. And they do a lot of that in those first level classes. And you may think that there's not a lot of that going on because it's an e-learning environment, but there's surprisingly some great courses out there. And some of it is not just typed, content. I mean, you can embed videos, you have synchronous and asynchronous learning. There's all different formats. Some schools have required office hours where they can call you and talk. You can go out of your way to call and talk to the students. It doesn't mean that there's just a one-size-fits-all approach, which I think is really important.
Well, and that's one of the beauties, I think, of blended learning, is you can begin to customize it. Our daughter has her PhD in sociology, which, if you want to think of a useless degree, but so she teaches. And she started teaching in Arkansas and got really favorable reviews and all stuff. And now she's married with kids and is doing almost exclusively online. And so I've really appreciated her insights around when she started. When she did classes, she got great ratings, and as I'm sure you have in your courses, and Teacher of the Year at the university and a whole bunch of stuff. And she went online and her ratings fell into the 0 to 5. They fell into the mid 3s.
Wow.
She has now worked with it and done a lot of what you've talked about. She's now said, Dad, I'm getting the same ratings online that I was getting in person. But there's a whole different set of skills, being accessible to students, giving feedback, learning etiquette, and how do students feel like they're able to connect with me? And I'm still, this is one of my 21st. I need to learn more how to do that, because I think it's going to be the future. And again, it comes back, how do I use technology to create a feeling of belonging? It's one of the reasons I've been experimenting on LinkedIn the last year is I think the social media can create movements that students in a high school that have been mistreated, or there's been some kind of crisis, they can create a social movement, but that's not a personal relationship. That I think the relationship that comes from belonging becomes so critical. And I'm trying to learn how to make that happen better. And so your advice was, anyway, we're meandering here, but it was very helpful around how do you, and one of the things we found in organizations is there's a time to stay connected through technology, and there's a time to stay connected in person. So simple research. If we're going to have a high-performing team distributed around the world, so we do 24-hour manufacturing, make sure that they meet in person first, that you have face-to-face so that you get the social signals, you get the social cues, and then go off to India, to Europe, to America, do your 24-hour team manufacturing, but then come back together. So move in and out of this kind of blended learning or paradoxical learning, where we learn to work with each other. And I think we're seeing some of that begin to happen in good organizations.
I'm curious, are you an extrovert or an introvert?
Oh, I'm 100% introvert, 100%.
And I find a lot of online students are more introverted, and they prefer that, not having that pressure on them to answer immediately. And some of that's, and I've seen you mentioned that TED Talks are great, but they're not super engaging. They're just a different way to deliver information. And I agree that TED Talks have just amazing content, and there's a place for them. And those are the kinds of things that I add to courses to help, students in certain ways. And a lot of the things you're talking about are just ways to interact. But I think that there's different preferences for learning based on our personality types. I'm more of an extrovert, so you'd think maybe I'd want to teach in a more face-to-face setting. But I really love I do get a lot of interaction. It's just maybe not in person, but in that kind of setting. So it is fascinating to see how everybody gets drawn to what they get drawn into. And I also noticed that you're doing something with is it RBL Institute, where you have these mini forums? Now you're using technology to get to connect with small groups, 5-10 people at a time, to facilitate topics. And how are you doing that? I'm curious about that.
Thank you for asking. By the way, I think those of us who have predispositions to introvert, extrovert can play the other role. I can be an extrovert when I'm on the phone or when I teach, but boy, at the end of the day, I need to go sit and read my Shakespeare, or probably not Beowulf and probably not Shakespeare, but my John Clancy novel. I'll confess. One of the things we've learned when teams come together is that they come together even from different places, managing time and content. So we formed an institute where companies pay a fee to join, and they're companies from all over the world. We pick a topic. How do you manage retention of people in China? It's a fairly narrow topic. We don't want more than 5 to 10 people on a phone call, and we do what we call a 1-hour mini forum. We never go more than an hour, and it's somewhat prescriptive. It says, what's the challenge you face around retaining employees in China? Can you share quickly what that is? Good. We've got 6 people to share. What's something you're doing that helps? And people share. And then we say, do you have questions to ask each other? And then one of the things I think it's, for me, a test of technology, does it enable what the psychologists call a BID, B-I-D? In the marriage research by John Gottman, marriages or relationships, doesn't have to be a marriage, that stay together, in 80 to 90% of the time, you respond to a bid in a favorable way. So I say, gee, Diane, that's a great topic. Can we have a cup of coffee? I've made a bid. In relationships that work, the bid is responded to. Or a bid could be, oh, man, I'm really having trouble today. I'm really struggling with. Do people join you? In HR. And this is where, for me, the test of technology comes through. In LinkedIn, I measure, I had all these people liked my article. Suddenly I'm cool. Well, am I connected enough with them that if I made a request for a bid, would they respond? Organizations should be places where people respond. We were doing work with a hospital. I wasn't doing the work. They did the work. And they were opening a hospital. They had to hire 400 people in 3 months. 2 months into it, the HR person had hired 200. They had to hire 200 people in a month. Put out a technology request. I'm really struggling, which is being open, being emotionally vulnerable. I got to hire 200 people in 30 days. The next day, 20 people showed up and said, "We're here. We're here." Next, 48 hours. We're here. You put out a bid through technology because we have the kind of community. We're here. They said, we're flying in our talent people. You got us. We're going to solve this. And they did. And I get goosebumps. I think that's the kind of stuff technology can enable if there's a relationship that a bid is responded to. I kind of wonder if I went out on LinkedIn and said, I'm really depressed. What do you think? I get liked, but I'm not sure I get response. And that's the nugget I haven't yet discovered. It's the acorn I haven't grown into a tree. How do we create this sense of community so that when a bid is extended, and I think we get that. I mean, this is John Gottman's incredible research about how do relationships endure over time. Well, one of the keys is if I make a bid to my wife, I know that 90% or 100% she'll respond. One of our kids makes a bid. Dad, my husband is sick. I'm on the way to the hospital. I'm scared. That's a bid to our daughter. We're on the flight. Well, you're going to miss work. How dare you tell us we're missing work? We're there.
Right.
You made a bid. And that's what we want to create in organizations, where through technology we can make and respond to those bids in a positive way. Okay, I've just rambled.
Is that your new book? Make and respond
No, our
to
new
bids?
book is just, well, that's more, I tend to write books on personal stuff. We did a book called Why It Work, and this is a book on organization. Sometimes it's so hard to get the simplicity on the other side of complexity, but this is what, excuse me, the book is about. About a year ago on TV, I saw a scene where a mother and her sons and the grandmother was at the beach in Florida. The boys got caught in a riptide. They're being pulled out in the ocean. The mother jumps in. She's pulled out. The grandmother jumps in. Suddenly, 4 people are in a riptide. Within 2 minutes, 80 people join arms. And it's just such a powerful visual.
Yeah.
When they're standing on the beach or when the water's too deep, they have boogie boards or balls, surfboards, and they join arms and they save the 4 people. What a wonderful story.
Yeah.
Here's the question. How do you create an organization with tens of thousands of employees who can do that? You can create a startup firm. So you go create a startup firm doing radio shows, and you get 10 people, you join arms, you go make it happen. How do you scale that in a huge company? And so Arthur Young, Y-E-U-N-G, in China said, Dave, that's what we're doing at Tencent, Alibaba, Haier, Huawei. The Chinese firms that are private-owned enterprises have figured out how do you scale this incredibly rapid market response to opportunity and scale it in a huge global organization. Wow. Our book shows how to make that happen.
That's going to be a huge seller then. I mean, everything.
Oh, I doubt it'll sell, but it'll.
I
mean, it's drafted. We decided, haven't ever done this. In fact, just today, but we decided to write the whole book because it's got Chinese companies and it's got Facebook and Amazon and Google, U.S. companies that seem to be doing this, and we've had access to those companies. But because it's a complicated answer, I mean, the simple, we got 80 people join arms and we save this family. That I get, but how do you scale that?
Yeah.
So Arthur and I decided we're going to write the entire book. It's drafted, and now we've got a couple of publishers saying, wow, that's really interesting.
I'll bet.
And China is where some of the most innovative work is going on. So we've gone into depth on some of those. So this is not a book, I'm sorry, it's not a book on personal change. It's more a book on organizational agility.
Is there any, can it be applicable to, everybody's trying to go do things at scale in marketing. And is it going to be something that they could use? I remember writing a brand publishing course before I left Forbes School of Business, where we were talking. The biggest thing that the CMOs were all complaining about was being able to get their message out at scale. Is there any applicable issues?
Absolutely.
Oh, well, then I can.
Absolutely, because
I mean
it's interesting. We haven't taken that angle on it because we're both coming out of the organizational paradigm. But absolutely, it's how do you move quickly into market opportunities? How do you brand? How do you create agility? And not doing it would be the Toys R Us example. Look at what Toys R Us had. They had a cachet. They had a brand marketing for 25 years. But when the world changed to being online, and Lego's struggling with that, one of the great toy companies of the world.
Right.
So how do you create this curiosity, your world, growth mindset, agility, whatever you want to call it? How do you move so quickly that you can respond? And yeah, that's the book we've written, and kind of excited about it to see how companies can do that.
I mean, it sounds like a very proactive approach, and I know your books in the past have done amazingly well, so I'm really looking forward to that. And I'm sure a lot of people are going to want to know when this book comes out, so this is probably a good time to find out, how can people reach you? How can they learn out more about what you're doing? And
LinkedIn. Follow me on LinkedIn. I am trying to post every Tuesday. Tomorrow I'm posting I'm trying to, my posts have just really all over. Last week it was, how do you see the good in other people rather than the bad? The week before was how do you work with a leader you don't like? Tomorrow it's more focused on HR, which we didn't even talk about. HR is not about the structure and roles. It's about relationships, which we did talk about. How do you build relationships that work? So follow me on LinkedIn, or I'm really pretty good at email. It's my initials, DOU@umich.edu, DOU@umich.edu. And I love the world of ideas. So tell me the thing in the curiosity world where you're getting very grounded. What's something you're focused on next? What's a question that, and I raised for you a couple of acorn questions, the ones that haven't grown up yet, that I still am struggling with. Mm-hmm. What are some of the questions you're thinking about, Diane? I love learning from learners.
Well, this has been, the question was, would I survive learning how to do the statistics required to do this? But it was all, to me, the next level is I want to know how to get CEOs interested in how important curiosity is to the success of their organizations, because I just think with artificial intelligence and the focus on innovation is going to take over with what everybody's going to be concerned with, and I think that you got to get down to the basic levels. And I think that my goal is to really connect with the leaders out there and get their insight as to what they think they're going to do to keep up, to not become Toys R Us. And so you walked right into what I'm interested in. Thank you for that.
So where does that start, you think?
What do you mean, where does that
start?
If
you were to solve, in order to get a leader or CEO or senior manager, to get him or her connected to curiosity, where would that discussion begin?
I think you need to start with the people you have connections with a major CEOs. I have very good connections through working on a lot of board of advisors groups. And I think if you can get some of the well-known people to just start with small groups and see what it does to look at these levels and what they can accomplish by finding out what's holding them back and what they can do next. And I think a lot of it's word of mouth. To get CEOs like to hear from other CEOs. I found that they want to know that it's working for someone else, and I think that's the starting point for me. Any suggestion from you?
Yeah, I mean, you got a process starting point, which is what you've just done, which is brilliant. I mean, we learn from those we respect. For me, the content would be also critical. So what is it I want CEOs to talk about? And where I would probably start is now we're going to do a closed loop where we began our discussion. Values defined by the outcome I care about. Mm-hmm. I don't think CEOs care about curiosity.
Right.
I mean, that isn't why.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I'd even go beyond that. I think CEOs care about winning in the marketplace, and it could be stock value. So one of the last books I'm really excited we did was, we call it Leadership Capital Index. CEOs don't care about leadership competencies; they care about stock price.
Right.
So to say, would you like to increase your stock price 20% for the same earnings? Let me think about that. Yeah. Well, if you can demonstrate to the investment community that you have a quality of leadership that is better than your competitors, the investors will give you an intangible premium of 20%. Really? Yeah. Here's the evidence. Wow. So I'm going to go do a leadership training program, not just to get my leaders trained well. I totally agree with that. Mm-hmm. But so that my investors, that's the will give me a 20% premium. Or customers. Would you like to get more revenue from your targeted customers? Duh. Well, let's show how Disney does that. Why is Disney able to charge double for a Disney hotel And it's not because they have soap with rabbit ears. It's or mouse ears. It's because they've created an identity in the marketplace, that's your branding, that people will pay a premium for the Disney experience.
Right.
Would you like to do that? Yeah, I'd like to get a premium. Well, let me tell you what you need to do with your curiosity, your people, your internal. So the process you've laid out, I think, is brilliant. I mean, you start with a pebble in the pond, and it expands to others. The content is where I find HR people often making a mistake. They talk I'm going to hire people, I'm going to pay people, I'm going to train people. Well, I don't see CEOs particularly worried about that. They worry about what's my stock price, what's my customer share. And those are things CEOs should be worried about. So when I can make the bridge between the outcomes they care about, that's the value they're after, and what I know something about, then we have a win-win situation. Anyway, that's my comment.
That's awesome, and that's such a great place for us to end. And I kept you so long today, and because I'm so fascinated with what you're doing and your work, and I really want to thank you so much for adding so much value to what we do on this show. And I was really looking forward to this, and Professor Rao was really nice to introduce us, and I just want to thank you again for being such a wonderful guest, Dave. Thank you.